And welcome back to yet another edition of the I Prefer the 80s and 90s Sports Podcast. Over today, editorial, where I, Richard Harris, talk about why I prefer the sports of the 80s and 90s to today. Yesterday, I talked about how people are now trying to give the Houston Astros credit and saying that they are the Yankees of the 90s. And I dispute it, disagree with it, so on and so forth. Another topic I dispute, that I keep hearing about today is everybody is a GOAT of something. Whether it's, someone is the best assist man in basketball, soccer, hockey, the best right-handed pitcher who throws 95 miles an hour. Person is the GOAT of the assists. He may not be the best point guard, but can really pass the ball. Today's topic, to me, this man is the GOAT of the NFL. And the reason why I say he is the GOAT of the NFL isn't because he won championships, which he did. Isn't because he was the best player at his position, which he was. Isn't only because he just flat out simply was the best football player I ever saw. Now, I tried to do this blog, but it's 88 degrees here in LA, so the kids are at the pool, so you'll hear some kids in the background making noise. God bless the kids. At least they got a pool to swim in. When we were kids, we had to go to a park. Then again, I lived in New York. I'm sure a lot of the homes here in LA, all the apartment complexes probably didn't start out with pools, but eventually a lot of these places out here have pools, so God bless them. But to me, the greatest football player, bar none, is Lawrence Taylor. I'm asked, why do I do a show like I do? And I told you one of the reasons why I do a show like I do is the GOAT discussion is part of it. I feel like this era of sport does not respect, appreciate, give credit to properly to the studs, the studettes of my era of sports. I think the sports of the 60s and the 70s was evolving, and I think they would acknowledge that sports during the 80s and 90s simply was better than it was in the 70s and in the 60s. I've yet to sit back and say and acknowledge that sports of this era is better than the sports of the 80s and 90s. And the reason why I've yet to do so is that I don't see anything better than what I saw in my era. And one thing that I have yet to see in this era is any football player who resembles Lawrence Taylor. They keep saying Micah Parsons is the next Lawrence Taylor. They keep saying Von Miller was a Lawrence Taylor. They keep saying Aaron Donald is better than Lawrence Taylor, which really, really, really angers me. And the reason why I say what I say, and the reason why Tom Brady is not the GOAT of football, he is maybe one of the best winners in football history. In the Super Bowl era, he is the best winner, but he is not the greatest football player and not the greatest quarterback either. He's just a great winner. And so let's analyze and tell you why I say what I say. Then I can get back to watching football for the second half is about to start. It's one thing when you're great. See, when I was a kid, we didn't hear about who the greatest was of anything because there was only two people that our fathers told us was the greatest of whatever. And they talked about Jim Brown was the greatest football player. And they talked about Muhammad Ali because Muhammad Ali said he was the greatest. And as a kid growing up watching him, hard to dispute it. Obviously, as he got older, he got slower, the skills got a little worse. He took more punishment, and he was never the same. And we lost his gift of gab, and then eventually we lost him. Jim Brown quit football too soon, but Jim Brown didn't care about what you thought about him quitting football too soon, didn't care what you thought about him as a man, as a person, as anything. He was all about him, and I'm not saying he was selfish. I'm just saying that he just didn't want no one to tell him how to be. And then, of course, he became an activist. He was always an activist. And he's had some run-ins with the law. And unfortunately, some people remember him more for his run-ins with the law than for his dominance on the football field, which is sad because he really was a monster on the field. Lawrence Taylor and everyone else, look, let me explain it so that way you understand it. The reason why I say what I say about Lawrence Taylor is through all the great players that ever played sport evolves. It evolves into, like this commercial that I'm watching. They started out showing running back, then it turns to does a spin move, and then it turns into Jim Brown, then it turns into Walter Payton, then it turns into Emmitt Smith, then it turns into Tiki Barber, then it turns into different people. And so you watch them all evolve into something. No one has evolved into what Lawrence Taylor was. First thing that Lawrence Taylor did, he changed the draft. Every team in that era had to say to themselves, if we're going to win the Super Bowl, if we're going to compete for a division championship, if we're going to do this, that, and the other thing, we have to find one guy, maybe two guys, who can block that man. And even though he played on the other coast, in the other conference, every team had Lawrence Taylor in their heads. Now, every team is going to say some had success against him. Other teams are going to say he didn't do anything that dominated them in games. But the simple fact is his impact was felt league-wide for not 1 year, not 5 years, for at least 10 years, if not more. And there were great players that played during this time period. Reggie White, Bruce Smith, sensational defensive players. Ronnie Lott, great defensive player. Troy Polamalu didn't play during his era, but I'm just naming great defensive players. But see, I can say without certainty, with 100% certainty, I should say, that nobody could replicate Lawrence Taylor. Ronnie Lott hit hard, could cover, was a safety. But if you think about through the history of safeties, how many safeties in the history of the league played like Ronnie Lott? Steve Atwater couldn't cover. John Lynch couldn't cover. Paul Krause couldn't cover, even though Paul Krause got, the most interceptions are up there in the history of the league. He didn't get that because he covered people. He got that because of errant throws and maybe the occasional cover. But Ronnie Lott stuck his nose up at the line of scrimmage and played like a linebacker, played like a DB, played like a safety. A rarity. And there have been many outside linebackers that have played outside linebacker. Derek Thomas, Cornelius Bennett. A lot of players have played that position. Pat Swillig. But people did not dominate games like Lawrence Taylor. So not only did he impact the draft and make you have to draft a tight end, a right tackle who could protect the quarterback's blind side, a fullback or a running back that was big enough to stand in front of him, he made you do so many different things on every play. You had to account for him on every single play. For example, there's a great video of Lawrence Taylor. Handoff to Dalton Hilliard, who was a very fast running back for the New Orleans Saints. And he is running away from Taylor from the other side. And Taylor runs over and tackles him. He goes from his side of the line through all of the minutia in front of him and somehow gets over there and makes the play. Like, he made things vogue in football. Like, you couldn't sit on every play. You couldn't take a break. You had to block him. You had to have schemes where you had to block backside or he'd chase it down. Or he'd get in the coverage and intercept it and go 97 yards for a touchdown. Ask Detroit. Ask the 49ers. I think Aaron Donald is a great football player. I do. I think Ray Lewis was a great football player. I think they've been great football players. But nobody. I mean, people who root for Chicago Bears would say Singletary, and they had Lawrence Taylor-like player and Wilbur Marshall and Otis Wilson. The difference is the Bears ran a 46 defense that had 8 people on the line. The Giants ran a defense that had 4 people on the line, and in most cases, 3 people on the line. And Taylor made plays in that setting. It's easy to rush the passer when 8 people are rushing against 5, against 6. Teams had to double team him all of the time. And I remember, it's funny, John Robinson said they beat the Giants in a playoff game. Flipper Anderson caught the pass, still running with the ball right now. And John Robinson said he got 2, which means there's 70 plays in the game, and he only affected 2. Which made me laugh because the entire game, he got pressure on Jim Everett. He disrupted the running game. But at the end of the day, for the coach to be like, he got 2, and that be a part of his conversation, the conversation should be, we won the game. But he's in Robinson's head. And this is 9 years into his career. This wasn't 81, 82, 83. This is when he is a bona fide vet. And so all these guys who have success in the league, and a lot of them do. And this is the era thing that I keep talking about in terms of GOATs. A GOAT isn't great for 1 year. Isn't great for 5 years. A GOAT is great to the very bitter end. I'll never forget as long as I live because there was a day where my girlfriend dumped me. But the Giants were playing the Cowboys. And it was one of Lawrence Taylor's final games as a Giant. And the Cowboys at that time was a juggernaut. The offensive line was special. Emmitt Smith, Michael Irvin, and the Giants fought to the bitter end. Lost the game. Emmitt Smith had the game of his life with a broken arm, broken shoulder. But Lawrence Taylor still got 2 sacks in that game. With the crowd chanting, knowing that it was up to him. And for an outside linebacker should not have effect on a game that affects the entire game. His specialty is third down. But Lawrence Taylor's specialty was first down, second down, third down. Now, automatically people are going to say, well, then the Giants should have won more games. Well, he don't play offense. I mean, he's still the only defensive player I know that played a game in New Orleans on a Sunday night football game and single-handedly beat the Saints. Single-handedly destroyed the Saints. Our quarterback was hurt. He put the team on his back and made, 3 sacks, fumble recoveries, disruption in the backfield. And I've never seen anyone since. Now, there have been players. Don't get me wrong. Derek Thomas had 7 sacks in a game. Somebody just recently had 6 sacks in a game, in an NFL game. Lawrence Taylor never had 6 sacks game, never had a 7 sack game. And so Derek Thomas people will say, well, Derek Thomas had 7 sacks. And there are players who have more sacks than Lawrence Taylor has. But Bruce Smith and Reggie White got over 190. Bruce Smith, I think, got 200. And Bruce Smith and Reggie White, they were some bad mothers. They could play. But they can be blocked. They dominated games too. But not like Lawrence Taylor. I ain't never heard any team talk about, well, we were drafting this guy because we need to be able to block, Reggie White. Bruce Smith. Never heard the Jets say that. The Patriots had big Bruce Armstrong, and he was supposed to be the one to block. Bruce Smith. But smart teams would put Bruce Smith on the other side. If you had success against one of them, they'd move that person. They'd move Reggie White to the other side of the line. Okay. The center for the Cowboys, Stepnoski's doing a good job. Let's move Reggie White outside. Eric Williams is having a good side. Well, let's go to the other side against Tuanay. But to me, that's the separation between the GOATs and the greats. Reggie was great. Bruce Smith is great. But Lawrence Taylor completely changed football. And that's what I find funny about all discussions about GOATs. Because the GOATs revolutionized the games. They changed the games. When I was a kid, to me, Dr. J was the man in basketball. And then it evolved into Michael Jordan. And Michael Jordan was a part of a big era of basketball where everybody tried to play like Dr. J. And then they all tried to play like him. And then a piece of the next generation said, we can't play like him. In fact, the whole generation said, we can't play like him. There's only one guy who can play like him. And that one guy was Kobe. Tracy McGrady could jump through the sky. Vince Carter could too. But they couldn't play like Mike. And then LeBron, he couldn't play like Kobe. So he tried to play like LeBron. He tried to play like Magic 40 years earlier. But he revolutionized the game. Steph Curry is revolutionizing the game now. And maybe he is the person that most people should pay more attention to than LeBron, but they don't because he's just shooting. He's just a black guy that can shoot. There have been a lot of white guys who can shoot, but very rarely have we seen a black guy that can shoot. In baseball, there's nobody revolutionizing the game. People will say Ohtani's revolutionizing us. He's pitching and hitting. Well, Babe Ruth did that. A lot of pitchers could hit and pitch. They just weren't given the opportunity to. And maybe Ohtani negotiated that in his contract that you get to give me a chance to hit and pitch, or I won't play. But there are a lot of pitchers who could hit. They just don't hit 40 home runs. And we'll never know because they don't get the opportunity to. Pitchers are told to bunt. But Wayne Gretzky, playing hockey, revolutionized hockey to the point where many have come from behind him, but they're not him. They try to play like him, but they can't do what he did. Paul Kariya was supposed to be that guy. He couldn't do it. Pavel Bure. He couldn't do it. Ovechkin is about to pass, is going to try to pass this year Gretzky's goal scoring record. Goals in a career. And he might do it. But he's not better than Gretzky. This generation will say he's better. He's got more goals. I don't think so. I don't think so. Anyway, my point simply is, to me, the GOATs are people who revolutionized the game, changed the game. And no one's changed the game football since Lawrence Taylor. Brady didn't change the game. People crack me up every day when I keep hearing them criticize Belichick. Belichick's defense kept Brady in games so his team could win. Belichick's defense won games for Brady. So they came as a package deal. And people keep saying, well, Brady doing this since he left Belichick. What people won't say is Brady went to Tampa Bay. Tampa Bay said, okay, I've got Mike Evans, who's a sensational receiver. Let's go out and get him more weapons. Let's bring him his tight end. Let's bring in Antonio Brown. Let's bring in running backs to go along with this insane defense that they already have. And basically keep it like it's still the Patriots. But people don't say that. They say, no, it's Brady's greatness is why he wins. It's not Brady's greatness. They brought in pieces to make it happen. They did not get any major injuries on that team that entire year, on defense or offense. But I digress. Lawrence Taylor is the greatest football player to ever live. Like it or not.